couple of years ago, I did this for KCET with Jim Doty, president of Chapman University, when we first opened the art museum.
Yeah. When did you open that museum? By the way, we have Mark Hilbert on. We're already rolling. We're talking about his museum in Chapman University. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff with Mark, and I've known him for a very long time, and he's got a very interesting backstory. And I think you're the first person I've ever had on that had their own museum, that they built it from scratch and did the whole thing.
Well, there's nobody else that's crazy enough.
I know one other person, but he didn't build. I know a couple, but they didn't build it themselves. They just said, "Here, take it," and did whatever. But sure. That's a big difference from that and building a museum, which we will get into. But I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Sure. So you've lived in California forever, but were you from California?
Yeah, I grew up in California. Actually, I was born in New York City. My family was living in California, Pasadena, actually, at the time. And then my mother went to New York to have me because her family was back there. Yeah. And then 3 months later came back to Pasadena.
So you're a native Californian.
Yeah, essentially.
Completely. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it was just happenstance that you were born in New York.
Yes.
And so did you grow up in Pasadena?
In Pasadena.
Oh, now that's an interesting thing, because what time frame was that?
Well, that was during the 40s and 50s, early part of 60s. And one of my earliest experiences in school was I was taken to the Southwest Museum, where I first saw the Indian pottery and Navajo weavings.
And so when would that have been? You would have been?
Probably like in the 4th grade or 5th grade.
Yeah, young. And what was that feeling? What did you?
It was like a different world.
Yeah.
Totally.
I bet, especially in Pasadena.
Oh, yeah, especially.
Yeah,
right.
And for those who don't know the museum, that was Charles Lummis started that museum, and now it's part of the Archery Museum, and it's still open. And do you ever go occasionally? They have it open like 3 days a week.
It's not open right now.
Oh, because of COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah, bummer.
So, unfortunately.
Yeah, because it has some amazing pottery that's still over there. Some large murals. I think there's a huge mural that was done by maybe Pablito Velarde or something that's in there as well. And so growing up in Pasadena, what was that like in Pasadena in the 40s and 50s?
Well, it was ideal. It was already built out. The most fun I had as a kid, I think, was going down to the canyon and hiking in the canyon up in the hills. So with some buddies, we always had a good time. On Saturdays, there was waterfalls up there. We used to go up and enjoy those.
Was there smog and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that was a problem.
Yeah.
There was a lot of smog.
Yeah, that's been my big, thing about Pasadena. I think it's one of the prettiest places, quite frankly, in the planet. It's just the smog comes in there.
Yeah, but not so much anymore with electric cars and, modifications.
I know, isn't it amazing when you think about it?
They cleaned it up.
That, it could be back like the 20s and 30s when we're all the electric cars and we don't have any gas cars.
Yeah.
And you'll see the mountains again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Then you'll be like, I want to come back to California. Yeah. Though you're still there. You never left.
Yeah. Well, we moved to Newport Beach later, and we've been there ever since.
And so when you were growing up as a kid, were you interested in art? Or, you clearly got, ignited by the Native American art from the Southwest Museum.
Not really too much in the beginning. It really was more of a geek, a technical type person. Ended up getting a degree in engineering from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. The interest in the Indian stuff really didn't come until a little later. I married my first wife, and she had some Indian background. I think she was 1/4 Indian, and she saw some Indian baskets for sale at a garage sale one day and bought a few and took them home. And I kind of got interested in them. I thought, this is pretty cool. And so we ended up going to Santa Fe and Arizona, and then we got nipped by the bug. Started collecting.
And what time frame was that? Is like early 70s kind of thing?
I would say,
early
early 70s. Yeah, I'd say about that time.
And did you know Kim Martindale or any of those
Sure,
guys
I did.
at that time?
Some of the shows. We'd go to Indian Market the week before and see all of the historic shows, that they were having at the time. They were very exciting and a lot of great material. We started to collect early on pottery, Pueblo pottery, and Navajo rugs. I think mostly Navajo rugs. Really was taken by the beautiful designs and originality of these rugs. Every one was different.
And so when you're starting to collect, is this early 70s or is this a little bit later that you start to do that?
I would say in the 70s.
Yeah, that's early on.
Yeah. And then early 80s maybe.
Yeah. And so what was it like collecting at that time? Because you would have known all the earlier players like Don Bennett, who I knew very well, of course. But
sure.
What was that? Do you have a sense of what it was like collecting at that time?
It was really
in the
wonderful.
70s?
There was a lot of wonderful personalities, the dealers. It was a lot of fun. And, mostly, once a year we go to the shows. And then in between, there'd be a few shows in Pasadena, and there'd be a show up in Marin County every year that I go to. And then there was a few pickers in Los Angeles. There was one fellow, I can't remember his name right now, but I used to go over there once a week, and he always had some little ditty things that he picked up,
Right. And at that point in time, so how old are you at that point in time? You're already through with college.
Probably in my 40s.
Oh, yeah. So well, let's back it up a little bit then. I want to go to the Polytech. You got a degree in
air conditioning engineering. So I went to work for the train company and their heavy refrigeration side, just commercial air conditioning for large buildings. And I was in that business for about 20 years. And I created I left them. The owner of the train office passed away and I left. And I created a product called the Chiller Optimizer, which was a product to reduce the energy consumption of large air conditioning systems. And I ran that company for a few years, and then somebody wanted to buy the company, and so that happened. I sold it to them, and then I took the money and started investing in commercial real estate. Now, prior to that, I had been investing in commercial real estate since I was about 23 or 24. I had taken a class at UCLA on economics, and one of the things that I learned is that the Washington, D.C. will always spend more money than they take in. And so they've got to print to make up the difference, which we now call inflation.
Right.
And if you have inflation working for you and you put down 25% on a piece of commercial property, then you have a lever arm of 4-to-1. And you get to take advantage of that inflation. So the more you buy, more property you acquire, the more net worth that you assemble. And
that's
so
assuming the properties are going up.
Well, in California, they seem to always go up.
Did. Yeah.
So 50 years.
Yeah, you were in the right place.
There have been periods of time when they went down, and those are periods that I bought like crazy.
Yeah, so like in the early 90s was a recession, right? Right in 90,
Serious
92.
recession. And it lasted until 97, 98, which was the bottom. And I acquired most of the real estate that I own today during that period. You could buy things for 40 cents on the dollar.
And you were able to do that because you had sold this device and built a company around it.
Right.
And tell me about that. How do you come up with an idea to go, okay, we need to have energy efficiency?
Well, actually, the Chiller Optimizer was really the second product. Somebody else had really come up with the original idea. But it was such a complicated product. I wanted to create kind of like an iPhone, something that's simple to operate, so that the average building engineer would understand how to make it work. And so I created a product that was very simple and easy to use, and that was kind of revolutionary in the way that the iPhone was.
And so And your background in engineering, especially in this specific
yeah,
area,
yeah.
that gave you the insight to why, and working for a business for 20 years, right?
Right,
That
yeah.
giving you the insight to go, there's a need,
Yeah.
and I can do it.
Right.
But doing that process has to be daunting in some respects because you have people who want to knock it off. You have to do trademarks, all those kind of things. I'm sure you had those
Sure.
deals,
I
right?
had to get a trademark, and computerization was very early in their application process. This was in probably 84, 85. So I found a company in Texas that would design the product and manufacture the product to my specifications. And then I gave him the software ideas that I wanted them to program into the program.
Wow, that's really early.
It was one of the first.
Yeah. Yeah, doing software installation in the mid 80s. Yeah, that was really early. So how did you learn that?
Well, I didn't do it. I just told the engineers that did the software what I wanted it to do, and said it made it easy enough for them to be able to create the software to do what I wanted to do. And that took a period of about a year to get that right.
Did you know you had a hit right away?
Well, I wouldn't want to say it was a hit, but it certainly afforded me the opportunity to have a few bucks to be able to invest in real estate, which was very small. I made the majority of my money in the real estate end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you took the one idea, built a business, sold the business, took the capital, understood leverage, and started
There you go.
adding to your portfolio. And then you bought at a time when things were down and people were scared in 1990 to 1996.
Yeah.
And that's what people can do.
Right.
if you have a long horizon, and you were young enough at that point in time to have the horizon.
Well, it just takes the vision to be able to see that if you buy in 98, you're buying at below construction cost. That it's a no-brainer, at least was for me. But everybody else was scared. They were running scared, and they were selling their products. Or a lot of what I bought was owned by the banks, and I bought entirely from bank-owned opportunities.
Well, a lot of this from the RTC stuff that was still hung over.
Well, not really the RTC. This was
because that was earlier. 80s.
That was a little earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you are starting to build your, I'll call it your commercial. I won't use the word empire, but we could call it that if you want.
No, let's be low key.
Okay. Now, but when you're starting to build your business, your commercial real estate business, at the same time, you're on the side buying Native American art. It was strictly at this time Native American art.
Right.
Yeah, you hadn't gotten into the paintings and stuff, which you will later on fairly significantly.
Well, in collecting the Navajo blankets and pottery, I became very excited about the Taos School of Artists. The Cowses and all of those boys.
Sharp and Phillips.
Burning
and
House.
all of them,
Yeah, I was very enamored. But I wasn't at a place with a family and needing to go to college that I could afford at that time to really spend big bucks that was required for the Taos artists. So about that time, we bought a little house in Palm Springs. And when we closed escrow on the house, like a lot of people, our bank account was a little emptified.
Right.
So we went to a consignment shop to see if we can buy some furniture and things for the wall on the cheap,
Right.
And there was a whole wall of these watercolors by California artists, California scene paintings. So I bought one, took it home and liked it, came back, and then I discovered a book called The California Style Book by Gordon Mcclelland, which talked about the early artists from 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that were doing California scene paintings. And being a Californian, of course, I could really relate to these pieces because they were showing everyday life in California, very much like the Taos artist.
Right. And I'm sure you could relate to it as a kid, your own growing up in California, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started to buy and started to collect these. And like a lot of things, it just kept on going. And pretty soon we were loaning these pieces out to museums for shows. And then later we were having tours from museums, from groups from museums coming to the house to look at the paintings. And then at some point, the director of the Irvine Museum, who'd been created a museum about 15 years before for Mrs. Irvine, came to the house, saw our collection, and said, "Gee, I'd like to show your work at our museum." Now, this was the first time that the Irvine Museum had ever shown paintings of somebody else's collection other than the Irvine collection.
Yeah, because they have an amazing collection.
They do. And of course, I was very honored.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But our work is a little different. The Irvine Museum was mostly early California Impressionism, which is the period between 1900 and 1930, which were primarily pure landscapes. So I decided that, really our collecting started about 1930 forward, and it showed people, everyday life scenes of people, whereas the Irvine collection really didn't have many people.
Did you, when you did that, when you started going, I'm going to collect this type of genre, that was a something you really thought about and doing it concretely versus, you just started buying a few and they had people and you go, I like this. And then you notice your collection continues to have more of this kind. And then you go, okay, this is really what I'm interested in.
It's a good point you're making. I ran into a really smart gallerist. He said, Mark, if you want to ever develop an important collection, you have to specialize in one particular area. Don't go and buy a little piece from there, and maybe you take a trip and you buy a piece, and then at the end you have a hodgepodge. He said, focus on one thing.
Yeah, he's right. Who was that?
Michael Johnson.
Yeah, smart man.
Real smart man.
Yeah, clearly.
So the second recommendation he made was to go to Europe and study the great masters and train your eye. So my wife and I went to Europe 25 times. We've been to several hundred art museums, all the great art museums, sometimes 5 or 6 times. And we looked at the great masters, and my wife came up with this little game. In each gallery, we would look and pick out our favorite painting, and then we would compare notes. And I was always hoping that my wife would pick a different painting so I would learn what she saw in the painting and vice versa. But sometimes we pick the same ones.
How often you pick the same one?
Well, I would say probably 30%.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So, and that's how we learned. We picked our way gallery by gallery through Europe and trained our eye. And it was a wonderful journey, and we still do. I mean, we have a trip planned for Paris in March. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to go.
I think this is a very important point that you bring up, that people often think, oh, you have a great eye, like it's something that you inherited, or, yes, you can have that component, but there's also the component of looking at enough material, critically looking at it, to really develop an eye. Yeah. And people who think that they can't look at art or understand art or buy art or collect art because they don't have the so-called eye, really, they just haven't put in the work.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I like the word critically.
Yeah.
Because my wife and I were critically looking at the paintings in each gallery. In fact, there was another point that my wife suggested early in our collecting career. I brought a landscape of ocean scene. And my wife looked at it and she says, it's a beautiful ocean scene. But if it had people in it, there would be more of a story. And all of a sudden, the light bulb went on in my head. And I said, of course, we ought to collect paintings with people in it, figurative, because it does tell a story when you see people doing things, everyday life things. It tells a story.
I also think people, when they go to museums, they can relate to humanity in the paintings. Yeah. We all can, right? We go, oh, I can see it. And it gives scale.
Yes, that's right. Exactly, scale.
You have a bluff that has no horse or figure or hogan or whatever. You really don't have the sense of the magnitude. But you put that thing in there, the humanity. Yeah. It changes the concept. Yeah, and it's funny. I'll give a shout out to Billy Schenk. I was looking at his collection, and I realized there was a certain type of figure that he liked in all his paintings, his historic art. They were always a kind of a female, either Pueblo Indian or someone that had a certain look to it. And I could see it through all his collection. And he had not done this I don't think consciously.
Consciously.
Yeah, he just did, and and when I pointed it out, he's like, "Yeah, that is true, I guess."
Yeah.
And we all do that.
Yeah.
I
Right.
do it, I'm sure. And I haven't critically thought about what it is that makes me go, "Ooh," but there's definitely something there,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll have to do that now after this. But it's one of those things I kind of
Yeah.
know it when I see it, and I'm sure at your point now, you've been doing this for 50 years.
Approximately.
Yeah,
Sure.
that you really have a good sense of what you like and you don't. And I know that you took that same critical thinking that you use for your paintings and have applied it to Navajo blankets. And tell us a little bit about that, because you have a wonderful collection of transitional blankets. What is it that you're looking for, and what kind of, floats your boat when you see it?
Well, I haven't really analyzed that too well, but I think my eye tends to go towards design. And very early on, I think that was attractive. I wanted to not worry too much about the thread count, or whether it had indigo or whether it had this or that kind of material in it. I was more interested in the design of the piece, and the color. I love color. And so I would, really look for the art and design in these pieces. And I found it in Navajo blankets, because so many of them had unique designs. There was no two alike. And it offered a great variety of possibilities. And then when you hang them up, we've done maybe 2 or 3 shows at different museums. And once you see them up on the wall all together, all of a sudden it takes on a life of its own. And it really becomes something really interesting.
Well, I think there's a continuity because you've collected them all, right? So you've curated them all.
That's correct, yeah.
So they all have the same sensibility of quality, color, design, which adds to the overall, essence of the collection.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some truth in that.
For sure. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think you hit it right on the head. And I do this myself, and I think a lot of dealers, unfortunately, don't do this, is that they get so locked into, like you said, the yarn, the types, the da-da-da-da, and they forget the really component that is humanity, which is the art, right?
The art,
It's
the
the
design.
art, the design, the person who behind the piece
That's right.
that made it. They didn't care that they were using raveled yarn other than the color. They wanted the color, and they're looking for, you can feel that artist in the piece.
Creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And the color sense. And, I'm sure if I looked through all your textiles, I would be blown away to see the similarities of art, just design and art that you've picked out over the years. And this is a long time. This is a long process. You've been collecting them since the 80s, right? Or earlier, maybe even? I don't know.
Well, it could have been into the 70s.
Yeah, that's a long time.
A lot of trips to Arizona and Santa Fe.
Yeah. And so you start to have people like the Irvine Company come to you and say, okay, you've got this collection that we want people to see. And so you're building a fairly significant collection at this point. You've curated it well. You've got enough pieces to do it. So what are you thinking at this point you're going to do with what you're doing?
Well, I really, at this point, had not given it any thought. But the decisive decision came when I drove to Los Angeles, and I went to a museum in Los Angeles by the name of LACMA.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into the first gallery, and it was awful. I won't go into the details, but it was an awful exhibition, and I didn't stay. I just turned around and left and went down to the next gallery just to get away from what I'd seen, and went into the next gallery, and that was even worse. So I hightailed it out of the museum, got in my car, driving home. I'm on the freeway, and I'm thinking to myself, why would they show this kind of ridiculous filth? It doesn't exactly enhance mankind. You're not going to leave feeling good or positive. And I just realized that so many museums are going down the same path, and are showing things that you can't relate to, B, showing things that are not uplifting or positive, and C, just darn right poor quality design and art. And it's as if beauty has disappeared from the lexicon of most museums these days. So I'm thinking to myself, what can I do about something like this? Well, I ought to call the LA Times and tell them how terrible this was. Well,
Yeah.
Then I realized that would be dumb. They'd only bring attention to something that I think doesn't deserve it. So the next thought was, maybe I'm just going to open up my own museum. And the more I thought about it, and I'm driving in the car, and I'm thinking about it. We've done a lot of museum shows where we've shown our art. People liked it, related to it. So I think we should do that. So I got home. I told my wife what I wanted to do. And as always, she supported the idea. We didn't know exactly how that was going to evolve.
Right.
But the idea was there. And so the next step was to try to find out, where I could establish the museum, because obviously I'm not J. Paul Getty. I can't I don't have the money to open up my own independent museum. I've served on the boards of 2 independent museums, and I realize the struggle that they have to pay for their personnel and for the real estate and so forth. And I didn't want this to be about a money struggle. I wanted it to be about the art, so I could focus on the art rather than worrying about raising money all the time. So I spent about 1.5 years looking around different institutions in Orange County. And finally, one morning, it hit me, Chapman University. So I had gone on the campus. My nephew was going to school there, and he showed me the campus, and it was a beautiful campus. And so I went on the computer to see if they had an art museum, and they didn't. And so I decided, well, I'm going to call them up. So that morning I picked up the phone, instantly picked up the phone. It happened to be Easter week. So I left a message in the vice president's office, and the message went like this: every great university needs an art museum. And within a day, I got a call back, and I could see the executive vice president, Cheryl Bourgeois, was looking online to see if she could find my name and
I'm
see if
sure.
I'm some kind of goofball that's
Exactly.
calling in, because usually them looking to others to raise money,
Right.
Here I'm calling them.
Right. I want to give you something.
Yeah, that's right. So within a week, we're driving around with the President Doty in a little cart, and Cheryl in the cart, looking for possible places on the campus. And the very last location they showed us was across the street from the Orange train station, which was a perfect place. People coming into town in the train station is a perfect place for an art museum. And so we spent about 6 months working together on a contract. And I wanted to get the contract right. It was very important that the vision that we had for the museum would be carried out. So there's like 1.5 pages of all the things that Chapman has to stick to, in the creation and the operation of the museum. And of course, that was part of the relationship. So gave them some money to get started creating a space for us. And initially, it was a temporary space of about 7,500 square feet. And within a couple of years, we had so many visitors, we realized that we needed to expand the museum. So right now, we're in the process we just finished the plans. The city has approved it. We have a date set to get started. This is December 31st. Next June, we're going to break ground, and we'll triple the size of the space. We're now at 7,500 square feet, and we're going to be at 22,000.
Yeah,
when we
that's
finish.
sizable.
So
Yeah.
that'll create a large enough space to really do some things.
And so what year did you make that phone call?
That was about 6 years ago.
6 years ago. So you move fast. I mean, it's really from planning to execution to everything, you've got it open and going, and it's been open for what,
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And so, right now, if you went to the museum, what would you see?
In terms of exhibitions, yeah. First thing I always look for is how many people are in the museum, because our focus is, our goal is to have 100,000 visitors a year by year 10. And we're about a third of the way in that hope, that dream. So right now we have a landscape show, a California Scene landscape show. And that's a show of paintings that have people in them, farming scenes with people and so forth. And the second show is a woman artist from the 50s and 60s who was part of the Bay Area Figurative School. That was an overlooked artist because for one reason or another, she went blind because of diabetes at an early age, and she kind of fell off the art scene. And so we, for the first time in 50 years, we're doing a retrospective of her work. And it's been a pretty popular show. People are very excited about seeing another.
Yeah, Bay Figurative. Yeah, that's
yeah.
some of the best, actually.
Right.
I mean, those are really, and especially the women artists were really super strong.
They were very good, and she's very powerful. So I would expect that there's going to be more museum shows.
And what's her
down the
name?
road. Her name is Henrietta Burke.
Henrietta Burke. Okay. Yeah. And interesting thing is when you do that and you recognize, and clearly you've collected her work because you saw something there, that'll affect the price structure as well.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it probably already has. I'm sure your first Henrietta Burke was less expensive than your last one.
Yeah. But that wasn't the goal. My goal is to...
Not at all, because you're giving it to the museum.
That's
There is
right.
zero financial
gain.
Maybe
right.
worse, because if it gets more expensive, then you have to pay more for insurance.
Yeah, it's actually worse. It is, because I only get, for what I give to the museum, I probably get back maybe in the end a third back from taxes and so forth.
No, I mean, you do it for love and philanthropy.
That's right.
You don't do it. I mean, because it is. You're going to look at a third.
Sure.
It's not what you would get if you went and sold it to someone.
Yeah. So if you look at Yelp, you'll see we're the only 5-star rated art museum in Southern California. And if you read some of what people write in, they just love the museum. I have people telling me, and I think this is a little crazy, but I have people come in and say, well, we went to museums in Europe, but I love this museum best. Or they'll say, this is my favorite museum, period. Or they'll say, thank you, Mr. Hilbert, for giving this to the community. So it's really very rewarding. I've gotten so much joy out of how I uplift people's lives, so that when they leave, they're uplifted from when they came in.
And do you think some of this is because you've tapped into a subject matter that's being overlooked?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you're touching base of the roots of California, not only from painters, but also the Native American component is a big component of this museum, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't now, but in our new
will
expansion, we're putting a gallery for Native American.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have the art and it fits. And
Right.
It's part of the region.
That's right.
I mean, California is part of the Southwest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Charles Loomis would tell you that.
It's all part of it. That's right.
And so who curates these shows? Do you do that, or do you have a curator, or you work with them? Or
Well, I talk to a lot of people about different shows, but I pretty much come up with the ideas for different shows. And then we have 2 or 3 professional curators that we use. Gordon Mcclelland is by far and away the number one person we use, because he is more or less the discoverer of the California Scene painter group and wrote about it. He's written many books on the subject. And we have several other curators that we hire. Sean Stern is another one, who is used to be the director of the Irvine Museum for 25 years and has a great eye. And then we have others as well. So we like to rely on outside curators because you get different voices.
yeah, it's true. Yeah, and you see different things.
Right.
And do you accept collections for the museum, outside collections? So if somebody goes, yeah, I want to donate my painting, can they do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have a committee, of course, of three that have to evaluate the quality to make sure that it's something consistent with what we show at the museum. For example, we have people all the time that want to donate abstract paintings to us, but we're purely a museum that shows representational art, meaning that when you look at it, you know exactly what it is, like a portrait or a landscape or a city scene.
And I'm sure that can be the whole gamut from like an Ed Mel kind of
Absolutely.
to,
Sure, it can have abstract in it.
Yeah.
All you have to do is be able to recognize what it is.
Yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it sets a tone,
Yeah.
Of what you want it to be. And I think that's important for museums to have, a vision of what they are and not just trying to be one-stop shopping.
Yeah.
I mean, they can, and there's big museums, and that's what they're for.
Sure.
But I think smaller regional museums, can offer huge amounts. I mean, like the Booth Museum in Cartersville, which is, I say small, but I mean, it's a huge thing now. They've really made it into something special. I don't know if you've visited that.
I have not.
You would love it.
And where is it?
It's in Cartersville, Georgia, which is basically Atlanta.
Okay.
And it has to be top of your list. Yeah. And I say this on many levels because it's, again, it is a representational museum of the West, mainly more West and not so much Native.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they've done an amazing job. I don't know how many square feet they have, but it's probably 300,000 square feet. They've really made it from zip to, I know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
Yeah. And they've bought from dealers and, really and work with artists. So you guys should be in alignment for sure. You are in alignment.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Seth Hopkins, go listen to that podcast. He was on the show and you'll hear about the Booth Museum.
Good idea.
So now I do have a question though. Is it everything you thought it would be to build and make your own museum?
100 times more.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear.
Yeah, because it's the joy.
Yeah.
That your life is an arc. You start off, you get an education, if you're lucky, you make a few bucks, you have a little bit of success, and then you get to the place where I've done it. What else is there to give me joy? And then I realized that giving back to the community is it. And so it's like it makes you feel whole when you do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It has to be even an odd feeling thinking if you're in your 40s, let's say when you're buying or your wife was buying those first baskets, that you would end up owning, running, curating, filling a museum.
Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising. I never would have dreamed it.
No, how could you?
And this is a dream come true, for sure.
What do you think it is about art that just turns your screws? Because it clearly does. You've donated all this time, energy, and money.
It's a hard thing to explain. All I can say is that that these are things that I could relate to as I was growing up, and If I see a scene, I'm looking at a Hopi painting right over here, or maybe a photograph. But I've been to Hopi before. I can relate to what's in that painting, and the feeling that I had when I was walking through the streets of Hopi. First, what is it called? The First
Mesa.
First Mesa. Yeah. It was kind of the same feeling I had when I made that first trip as a little boy to the Southwest Museum. I thought, what is this? It was like, it filled me with awe and wonder. I think I have that same feeling when I look at a photograph of like I'm looking at right now.
Did your parents, were they interested in art at all, or did they collect art or any of that?
Just a little bit. My father definitely had an artistic eye. He definitely had an eye for design in the way he dressed. And really, I used that eye, because what I did in the real estate area is I bought rundown buildings, and then that I saw potential in, and through proper painting, color design, landscape design, I was able to reposition a building that might be in a nice neighborhood, but was run down and improperly managed, so that I could better manage the building and create a nicer environment for people to live.
Yeah, you're doing the same thing as you're doing with the museum.
In a sense.
You're improving the culture and the area of the community.
Yeah, in a sense. I never thought about it that way.
For sure. I mean, there's nothing worse than an eyesore building that gets turned into something cool that people want to go to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like, that's what we all hope happens in so many places. Come to Tucson. I can point in half a dozen buildings that need to be worked on.
Oh, sounds good. We'll take a tour.
I'll show you. And so now if people want to go to the museum, how do they get there? How do they find it? You know, I know the pandemic's probably affected some things, but hours and that kind of stuff.
Well, the hours of the museum are Tuesday through Saturday from 11 to 5. Mm-hmm. And we've been open even during part of the COVID time. We've been open. The nice thing is the admission is free. That means if you're a family, you've got
That's fantastic.
friends, bring them to the museum. It's all free. It's located about 10 minutes away from Disneyland. Mm. So if you're coming to Disneyland and you're in Anaheim, Orange is right next door. And we're right off Chapman Boulevard, about a half a block. And Chapman runs right into Disneyland. So it's pretty easy to find. And you can have lunch across the street at the train station, which has a Ruby's restaurant that's an original old train station from the 20s, and visit our museum right across the street.
And so, you know, what do you see the vision of this museum going in the future? I mean, because at some point you're not going to be around, and somebody's going to have to fill your shoes at some point.
I think it's a real important question. Right now, in fact, this month, we put together a trust, and the trust is going to ask Chapman to run the museum along the lines that I've created it. And we have like 12 different points that they have to fulfill. So that means that when I'm gone, we're going to have enough money in an endowment to pay for the running of the museum. If they run the museum along the same lines, being able to keep it a representational art museum, for example.
And free. I have a feeling that was part of your idea, that you wanted it to be free.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a great thing. That's the best of all.
And my son, who's going to be on the board, is going to make sure that Chapman is going to do what they are supposed to do. And then he's got a grandson, who's also interested in being able to be on this board, plus a granddaughter. So we've got a third generation coming along that will be part of this trust, to be able to make sure once a year when Chapman requests funding for the museum for the year, that they submit all of the information of what they've accomplished in the previous years, so that we can evaluate it. And there'll be somebody to drive and actually go to the museum just to make sure that things are being run properly. Mm.
And you're happy with how everything's come out that way so far?
Yeah. And Chapman is a great university. It's a great senior staff. They're one of the fastest growing private universities in the West. Mm. They have about 10,000 students, and they're shooting for about 15,000 students down the road. They have two campuses, a main campus in Orange, and then a satellite in Irvine, where they have more medical oriented schools.
Do they have an art department at all? Or?
They do.
Oh, good. Mm-hmm. I mean, because it seems like now you have an art museum, this would make sense. You could start focusing maybe on the arts and the degree programs, MFA and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, in fact, the director of our museum, Mary Platt, actually teaches a class on historic art and art history, and it's very popular among the students.
And is the main holdings California-based as far as the paintings? Are they mainly?
Our focus is on three things. One, fine art by California artists, and it isn't always art from California. Sometimes artists go to Mexico or the other
Yeah, sure.
countries, and they paint. So the fine artists, primarily California artists. The second thing is we also have a collection of illustration art. So if you like Norman Rockwell, for example, we have some Norman Rockwell paintings and other illustrators that were important. And then the third area is, since many of the artists in our collection were also working at the museum, at the movie studios, we also have what we call movie studio work, which is work that was created to make the movies. So they may be concept paintings, or they may be sketches, working out a particular character, or they may be actual cells that were used in the movies. So we put together interesting shows. We have a lot of Disney work, for example, from I think as early as 1932. We have sketches, some very early sketches.
Yeah, it seems like that would be a natural for where you're located and realism and everything.
Absolutely, because all these artists, some are still alive, and they've been contributing work to the museum. And then their sons and daughters also have inherited some of the work, and so those people are still in and around Burbank, actually, and some live in Orange County, but a lot of them still live in the Southland, and they come and they speak at the museum about their parents' careers and so forth.
And George Lucas is doing a museum in LA too.
Correct. And it should be a very, very popular museum when it opens. I can hardly wait to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of touching on what you've already done in the sense of that. I mean, I guess it's built around illustration and illustrators and things.
And fine art.
Yeah.
And also fine art, illustration, and movie studio work. So it's the same three things, actually, that our museum is doing right now.
And you do a fourth, which is Native American,
too. Yeah, that's coming. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a huge component.
Yeah.
I really do. And there's a lot of tribes that were in California and Arizona and New Mexico and all those.
Absolutely.
Utah. Yeah. So
it's part of our heritage.
It is. It is our heritage. In fact, it's the real American heritage.
That's
I guess
right.
you would say that in Mexico.
That's right.
So I think that sets you apart. The fact that you really have always loved native arts and was the basis of really kind of where, it isn't. It is exactly the basis from where you started with the Southwest Museum.
Yeah.
And
everything's kind of come full circle.
Yeah, and I think that's not unusual. I mean, that's where I started, was with Native American arts, and gone full circle. And because they all connect. Yeah. And they're interlocking, and they're, there's a similarity, a symbiosis that clearly works.
Yeah.
And I'm actually excited to see that when you get it set up too, what that will be like. That may be the most popular of all. Who knows? I don't know.
Well, we're just going to find out. But one of the things you did yesterday for me is open up my eyes to collecting contemporary Native American.
Yeah.
And I think that light bulb went on when you said that.
Yeah. It's
because we have a lot of the historic work, but I think our idea with the museum is to continue to collect contemporary artwork that falls along the same lines.
Yep.
And we could do the very same thing for Native American as well.
Yeah. I mean, it is an area that has been underserved, undercollected, that is ripe to explode, and rightly so. The Tony Abetas of the world, the Shanta Begays of the world, the great potters and jewelers, and, it just goes on and on. And, people want it, and it needs to be seen. And you know what? There really isn't anything out there. The Autry does some things, but there's not a lot of people that have really done it. And that's in California with, whatever 50 million people you have. Clearly, that's something that needs to be looked at and added to, and you could do it.
Yeah. The Autry's doing a very good job.
Yeah, they're great.
And but they're in Los Angeles, and we're in Orange County.
Yeah, and
And,
that's miles and miles and hours apart.
Yeah, well, it didn't used to be that
No.
far. It used to be an hour's drive, but today with traffic, what it is, it's not something that you want to do unless you do it during the right hours.
Yeah, and the kids, that live in Orange County aren't going up to the Autry.
Yeah, right.
They're going to go locally, whatever's there.
Right.
And just like you, who saw this material and got ignited and said, "This is something I'm interested in." There's kids that could be ignited that are, in a 5-mile radius.
Sure.
And there's millions of people, and they'll never make it to the Autry.
Yeah.
They'll never make it to the Lucas Museum, probably. They're just too far.
Yeah.
So
that's right. We have 3 million people in Orange County.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, though, we get a fair number of people from Los Angeles, from San Diego, that come in. Some come in on the train.
Yeah, I see it. It's different. It's unique.
Yeah.
It's something that appeals to their sensibilities.
Yeah. There really isn't as many museums in Los Angeles anymore that people really can relate to. The Autry is one standout.
Yeah. And the Southwest Museum when it's, open.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Pasadena Museum of California Art no longer exists. I was on the board of that for many years.
I didn't know that. When did that close?
That closed about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was on the board for about 8 years. And I learned an awful lot about what not to do running an art museum. Now I can make my own mistakes.
Yeah. What was the biggest takeaway of what not to do?
Very simple. Very simple. You can't show, let me say, in a small to medium-sized museum, you can't do justice to representational art and not objective or abstract art. You can't do justice to both. And what would happen is the people on the board would fight, almost like Arabs and Jews. They'd be fighting. Everybody was fighting for their position.
Got it.
And they weren't rowing together. And I think that's ultimately caused the demise of the museum. So I made a decision. I said, well, we're a small to medium-sized museum. We're going to focus on one area, and we're going to try to be the best that we can be in that area.
Yeah.
And that's been our mantra.
Well, I think it totally makes sense because you can't build a culture if you're banging heads all the time.
That's right.
And if you have limited resources and limited exhibit space and time, and you can't, get the troops to surround you and to support you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I see that. I would have never thought of it, but it makes total sense.
Well, it was just, the fact that I was on the board. I learned a lot of things of what to do.
That was a great museum. I mean, the exhibits they had some just blockbuster. Wayne Thiebaud and Dixon and Armin Hansen and they had some killers.
They really did. Yeah, sadly, the founders of the museum just kind of lost energy and staffing issues and so forth. So that was the reason that we established ourselves with Chapman University. They've got $500 million in the piggy bank. I never have to worry them selling paintings in order to make payroll.
Right. Yeah, and you lose accreditation and all that kind of stuff too if you start doing that.
So many museums struggle. And they have to sell their valuable painting assets in order to keep the doors open. Yeah. So I never have to worry about that.
Well, I think what you're doing is tremendous. I think it's vitally important.
Thank you.
I really do. I think that the arts are overlooked in our society.
They certainly are.
And that we have to have, if our schools aren't going to do it, which often they aren't, they just cut out art, then we have to have individuals like yourself who are willing to put in the time, energy, money, and commitment to make these places where kids that are, and other people too, adults that are creatively, interested in things can go to and get ignited. I mean, that's how it happens. And if you don't have it, you can't know you're an artist if you've never been exposed. And, just like you were exposed when you're in 4th grade, it changed your life.
Sure, absolutely. Well, one of our next focuses, besides the building project, is to create a program to expand a program to bring students and schools into the museum.
Yeah, it's
And
really important.
we've got some schools that come in, but we'd really like to dramatically increase that number of kids that we shepherd to the museum.
Yeah, and they'll be adults someday too.
That's correct.
And they're going to love it, and it's smart for Chapman, and it's just good.
Yeah.
It's good everything.
Yeah,
It's good karma, quite frankly.
absolutely.
And it is some of the collections online. Will you at some point try to get most of the things online for people to be able to search, or not?
I don't think so. I think that we try to put, we actually need more things online than what we have right now. But I think that our goal is to bring people to the museum.
Yeah, you want them to come and see the objects.
Yeah. The reason is you can see the colorfulness of a Van Gogh, for example. But to me, the most important part of any Van Gogh is being up close and personal and look at the brushwork.
Yeah,
Because you get a sense of the man's personality
it's true.
just looking at the brushwork. And if you don't see that, you're missing over half of the experience.
Yeah. I remember looking at Starry Night, and no one was looking at the damn painting. They all had their cameras.
Yeah.
And I took a photo of all the people looking at the cameras and
right.
not the painting.
Exactly. In fact, that's one of the fun things to do when I go to a museum. A lot of times I'll just watch the people. Like, for example, I just went to the Broad Museum downtown Los Angeles. And I put my back to the wall and one spot and just watched in this gallery for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I just watched what people did. And people rarely stop to look at these paintings. They just walked by. They never stopped. They just walked through the gallery.
Right.
Walked through the galleries. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really an interesting thing that they're not stopping. They're not reading the label. Because there really wasn't much on the label to read in many instances. And there wasn't really a storyline, really, to tell.
Yeah.
And, I want people to stop. I want them to be engaged in the painting and to be able to be studying and reading the label to learn more about what the painting has to do. Because I really feel that we can really be an educational institution if we can have people really engaged.
Yeah, and if you can put maybe like QR codes that are associated with it so they can take capture the information and go to it and build out maybe not the image so much as the biography and the backstory.
Yeah.
The backstory is really everything.
Right.
That's how they got to be where they could do what they do.
Yeah, that's right. Stories of Van Gogh, for example, are very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
how he evolved to this artist that he became.
Yeah, I think without that kind of tortured soul kind of sensibility that went through it, he would have been more of an asterisk potentially to history than art history, at least, than he is. Now, granted, he was a great painter. There's lots of great painters out there that just don't get found, just like the person you talked about from,
Henrietta Burke.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing her, maybe that show, and coming out and seeing the museum. I haven't been to it, and I'm going to now. It's definitely
wonderful.
It's on my list for sure.
Wonderful. Now the show does come down in mid-January, so if you'd like to come and see it, I'd sure like to put together some plans.
And will you have some of that up, even if it comes down? Will some of her work be somewhere in the museum?
Yeah. There will be.
Yeah. And what's the show that comes up after that? Do you know?
Yeah, we've got a show of Bradford Solomon, who's a contemporary artist.
Yeah.
He's been working since the 70s, and he does a lot of very interesting things. He's about in his 50s now. He's done a variety of different things. Portraits in the beginning. Did a lot of portraits of famous people.
Mm-hmm.
And then later he evolved to painting what we call object paintings. So he did paintings of everyday objects like radios or Bayer aspirin and so forth. But he has his own style of the way he treats things. And then the other show is a show of the uh, National Water American, maybe it's a National Watercolor Society, like the 100th anniversary, and it goes back to the early years, all the way up till today, of artists that have been working in the Watercolor Society.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
So you'll see the evolution of watercolor.
And it'll go from turn of the century to today?
Correct.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I haven't seen the actual show yet because it's not up.
Yeah.
I don't get involved with the curation.
Yeah.
I get more involved with the idea.
Yeah.
And then I turn it over to the curators to
that's what they do.
work their magic.
And they do.
Yeah, right.
They have a sense that's way different than what you do or what I could do.
Yeah, I'm very proud of our curators. This show that we have right now, I added up. We have 130 years of curatorial experience right now, and unfortunately, I go to a lot of museums where, and even some major museums where the level of curatorial experience is just not there. They may have 20 years curatorial experience, if that.
Well, it's hard to find good long-term curators.
It seems.
Because they get in an institution, they don't leave.
Yeah.
They like it, they stay.
Yeah.
Like Julie Saucy at TMA, she's been there for 30 years.
Yeah.
And they don't want to go.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing, they love it, and they have built a culture. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
So if somebody kind of ending up, and this will be for a very small segment of people, but if somebody's out there who goes, I have enough art, and maybe the ability to do something like you're doing, what would you suggest that they do?
Well, they could contact the museum, and our focus is on California artists, representational art. If they have something along those lines, that we'd be interested in looking at it and showing it, perhaps.
Yeah.
So let us know.
I think that's wonderful, and I bet somebody does.
Well, look forward to it.
Mark, thank you so much for taking the time today. And I know you're got a busy schedule of looking at art. That's why you're here, is to look at art. That's what you came for, to look at a collection. And we were fortunate enough to be able to have you on. So shout out to Art Hittner for making this happen.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much
for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun. I enjoyed it.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Bye.